Hi, folks. Welcome back. Here we are with our next recorded lecture. My name is Professor Abundes Guerra. You can call me Professor Abundes or Professor if you want to. With that said, what are we doing today? So today, as we see with these slides, we're going to be looking at utilitarianism and deontology. We're actually not going to get to deontology today. We'll save that for the next time, for the next recorded lecture. But we are going to sort of talk about utilitarianism. So we are going to be getting pretty abstract, keep that in mind, and pretty theoretical, as we're going to see in just a few moments. With that said, let's go ahead and start up these slides. So, outline for these slides, we're going to go ahead and look at the trolley problem. That'll be a thinking exercise. If you know about the trolley problem, you'll get a refresher. If not, I'll tell you all about it. We're going to go ahead and look at Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism. Ultimately, though, we're more interested in his students, John Stuart Mill, and his defense and revisions of utilitarianism. And as we're going to see, John Stuart Mill is going to be defending utilitarianism against objections. And we're going to consider 5 objections from your reading. Well, maybe we'll get to the wanderer problem today, if not next time. And next time we'll start talking about Kant's deontology. We're not going to finish Kant's deontology next time because it's quite complex. So we'll need 2 recorded lectures to go over it and do it some justice. As we're going to see, Kant's deontology is going to be talking about something called a categorical imperative. That's a fancy way of saying something. An imperative is a fancy way of saying it's something you have to do. An imperative is an order. And categorical is a fancy way of saying absolute, that you always have to do it. He's going to have 2 versions of it. Technically, he has more than 2, but we're going to go ahead and look at 2 versions of that categorical imperative. Okay, so, well, let me back up actually before we start talking about that picture. As we're going to see, I'm going to show you the trolley problem. Now, the trolley problem is a hypothetical thought experiment. It's completely unrealistic. Some say it's nonsensical. And to some extent, those people who criticize the trolley problem are correct. Maybe you're going to be one of those people. Now, the reason I give hypothetical thought experiments are for a few reasons. To begin, thought experiments are actually easier in some senses than the real life messy situations. So, it's kind of like training wheels to get you prepped. And secondly, thought experiments in some ways are like real life lab experiments. So real life lab experiments, if you're a scientist and you're in a lab setting, you try to purposefully control the setting and the variables to make sure that there's as few independent variables as possible to be a good scientist and know what it is that you're studying. Now, if you do this correctly and you're a good scientist, you're a good researcher, you'll have 1 or 2 probable hypotheses and you'll choose maybe 1 or 2 of them, right? Or maybe 1 of them, I'm not entirely sure. But it would be foolish to say that just because experiments in lab settings are unrealistic, and they are, right? You control for all these variables. Life, when you go out into the world, you can't really control for all those variables. But it would be foolish to say that experiments and research is therefore useless in science because it doesn't accurately measure or mimic the messiness of real life. No, lab-controlled experiments make it easier to predict and learn something interesting, and then you can apply that to the real life messy situations. Similarly, in thought experiments, I'm going to be purposefully limiting the external variables and purposefully limiting your choices so you can learn something interesting about this easier situation and apply it to the real life messier situations that have so many independent variables. So keep that in mind. That's roughly why I do them. So here's the trolley problem, right? You see a runaway trolley moving towards 5 tied up or otherwise incapacitated people lying on the main track. You are standing next to a lever that controls a switch. If you pull the lever, the trolley will be redirected onto a side track and the 5 people on the main track will be saved. However, there is a single person lying on the side track. Do note, you don't know how these people got here, and you will know their identity. Notice I say that you don't know their identity. It may be that if their identity was given to you, you would know them. Maybe one of these people is your mom, or your loved one, or your brother, or your sister, but you don't know. You don't know who they are. Their identity is not given to you. So option 1, and again, you only have 2 options. I know a lot of you are very selfless and might even jump into the track and try to sacrifice yourself. That's not an option. Option 1, Do nothing and allow the trolley to kill the 5 people on the main track. Option 2, pull the lever, diverting the trolley onto the side track where it will kill 1 person. Now, the option that we ask as philosophers is which is the more ethical option, or more simply, what is the right thing to do and why? So go ahead and pause this video right now. If you want to think about it for a second, do that now. Okay, so hopefully you thought about this for a moment, for a few seconds, maybe a few minutes, maybe even talk to someone about it. This is my prediction as your professor. My prediction is that most of you are going to choose to pull the lever and kill that 1 person. And my reasoning or prediction is that you folks are thinking that 5 lives are worth more than 1 life. 5 is greater than 1, that you're doing a bit of an arithmetic, a bit of a quantification here. If you are doing that, then you are thinking like a utilitarian. You're thinking like a consequentialist. Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill would say, good job at this point. So let's get into Jeremy Bentham, right? So utilitarianism is a type of consequentialism. Consequentialism is an ethical theory which seeks to promote a certain type of consequence. There can be an infinite amount of consequentialisms, right? So if I could come up with a consequentialism right now, right? I can call it beautyism, in which you try to promote the consequence of making things beautiful. So if you make things more beautiful or actions make things beautiful, then it's justified. I can come up with another consequentialism, right? Knowledgeism, right? Knowledgeism says that the consequence we want to promote is knowledge. So as long as any action you do promotes more knowledge, it's a good action. You're doing something morally right. Regardless, you can come up with a lot of consequentialism. Consequentialism just says that the ends justify the means. The consequences justify the means, whatever the consequence might be. Now, in utilitarianism, we're going to go ahead and promote a certain type of consequence. In particular, we're going to promote something called utility. Now, if you look in the dictionary and you look up utility, it's going to say something like usefulness or benefit. That's not exactly what utility means when Jeremy Bentham and when philosophers use it. Usually, when we talk about utilitarianism or utility, we're talking about happiness. In particular, Jeremy Bentham says that we should adopt something called the greatest happiness principle, which says that we should promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Now, here he has a quote which basically tells us, right, that happiness essentially means more pleasure and less pain. More pleasure and less pain. That is happiness. And we want to promote that for the greatest number of people. So what is the relationship between the right thing to do and the good thing in life? Well, the right thing to do is to promote more of the good, which is more pleasure and less pain, because that is happiness. That is utility. So what would Bentham say about the trolley problem? Oh, and don't worry about the experience machine. You guys didn't learn about the experience machine. But what would he say about the trolley problem? What do you think about that? Chances are, I'm going to tell you right now, chances are, if we're taking him here at face value, he would say save the 5. Because, sounds like weird to say this, right? But if on average, 1 person has a life of 100 happiness, then saving 5 people means that we're going to get 500 units of happiness, versus 1 person with 100 units of happiness on average, right? Now, at this point, John Stuart Mill enters the picture. And I will want to say at this point, a lot of people like, when I finish talking about Jeremy Bentham, a lot of my students like utilitarianism. Now, John Stuart Mill is going to enter this picture, and it's actually going to turn out that during the time that they were advancing utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill and his teacher, Jeremy Bentham, a lot of people didn't like utilitarianism. In particular, a lot of religious folks, a lot of, I believe, Protestants in the United Kingdom did not like it at all. And John Stuart Mill had to go on the defensive. Now, John Stuart Mill, he still adheres to the greatest happiness principle, promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number, right? But he's going to go ahead and respond to a lot of these objections that were directed at him and his teacher at his time. So here's some of them. Objection 1. This is disgusting utilitarianism. This is a doctrine worthy only of pigs, of swine. Pigs seek pleasure. Are you saying, John Stuart Mill, are you saying, Jeremy Bentham, that we humans are like pigs just seeking pleasure wherever it might be? That's disgusting. Don't debase us like that. The critics directed this at John Stuart Mill. Now here's the response. Yo, 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 he says. Calm down. I'm not saying you're pigs. I'm not saying that we as humans are pigs. What I am going to say, though, is that there are higher and lower pleasures in life. And it's better to be a human than a dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. So I'm not going to lie to you at this point, me as an instructor. John Stuart Mill was not a little, classist. He was classist. And he thought that higher pleasures were things associated with the higher class, things maybe like going to the opera or doing a lot of reading a lot of literature. And things that were associated with lower pleasures were things that were more, I guess, associated with lower classes or associated as being more vulgar or more physical, such as maybe drinking or having a fatty meal. You yourself don't have to import John Stuart Mill's classism, and you can still believe that there are higher and lower pleasures. So maybe a higher pleasure to you might be being in a healthy, functional relationship, either a romantic relationship or just a healthy, functional relationship with people around you, maybe your mom and your dad. And a lower pleasure might be, cheating on your partner with multiple other sexual partners. Cheating on that. That would be a lower pleasure, you might say. Again, it's better to have one higher pleasure and still be dissatisfied than have a million lower pleasures. So suppose a higher pleasure is eating a fancy gourmet meal at a Michelin restaurant, and a lower pleasure is eating a Big Mac from McDonald's. It's better to eat a fancy gourmet meal and be dissatisfied than have a million Big Macs and eat all the Big Macs in the world and be super stuffed. Now, how would we know which are the high and low pleasures according to John Stuart Mill? He says that we should consult those who have experienced both, and they will be able to tell us. They will be experts. But, here's the objection number 2, right? Many folks still choose the lower pleasure and forego the higher pleasure. Your so-called experts sometimes choose the lower pleasure. So why should we listen to them if they themselves choose the lower pleasure sometimes? Now, his reply here, right, is that they don't voluntarily choose the lower pleasures, that in a sense they're kind of confused, that they've been confused and been made confused by society, in a sense, that society has made them unable to enjoy the higher pleasures. So you can think of maybe like advertising in present day society that sort of pushes maybe younger folks or men or women or whatever, right, to maybe indulge in drinking or lower pleasures, whatever that might be. I suppose you can think of maybe a beer commercial or an alcohol commercial. But basically he's saying something similar here, right? That we as society need moral education so that everyone is able to learn to appreciate, right, the higher pleasures. And this is in line with the Chinese philosopher Mengzi. You can go ahead and look them up on your own time. But he also believes that humans need moral education. Now, here's objection 3. So at this point, a lot of people are sort of okay, my students, with utilitarianism. But usually once I finish objection 3 and objection 4, people start to have some more feelings about utilitarianism, start having some second guesses. We'll see if you start having some second guesses. Objection 3 says, isn't prioritizing your own happiness just very selfish? The reply is this. If you believe that you're prioritizing your own selfishness, you don't even understand what utilitarianism is, because you're not prioritizing your own happiness, you're prioritizing the greatest happiness for the greatest number. You're prioritizing everyone's happiness. In fact, John Stuart Mill says, utilitarianism can be quite selfless. Consider, for instance, the following. Though it is only in a very imperfect state of the world's arrangements that anyone can best serve the happiness of others by the absolute sacrifice of his or her own. What is the absolute sacrifice? He's talking about dying. He's talking about unaliving yourself, killing yourself. Yet so long as the world is in that imperfect state, I fully acknowledge, he says, that the readiness to make such a sacrifice is the highest virtue which can be found in a man. Think about that for a second. He's saying that if you can kill yourself in order to make everyone else around you happier, to promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number, that is not only virtuous, but it's the highest virtue which somebody can have. Furthermore, you have to be completely objective. You can't favor your own happiness or the happiness of a loved one. As between his or her own happiness and that of others, utilitarianism requires him to be as strictly impartial as a disinterested and benevolent spectator. So we talked about the trolley problem, right? But now consider two different versions of the trolley problem. Suppose that you are the one person tied to the track by yourself, and you could pull the lever and kill yourself to save 5 people. Well, according to utilitarianism, according to what John Stuart Mill is telling us right now, you would kind of have to, because it's not just about your own happiness. Your own happiness, on average, is not going to be higher than those of 5 other people. It sounds very rough, but he's basically saying, yeah, sacrifice yourself, kill yourself. Now consider another version. Suppose that one person tied to the track is someone you love, your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, whatever. You need to be impartial. You cannot be choosing favorites here. If it's just your one individual familiar, loved one on the track, you're going to have to kill them. You're going to have to kill them. So at this point, usually people start having some second guesses about utilitarianism and whether they would actually want to be able to go along with it. But yes, it is very intense, utilitarianism. It does not allow for favoritism in any way. So here are 2 more objections, right? Objection 4. Isn't this going to make you feel like a cold robot? Isn't this going to make you a cold, callous robot that's just making calculations all the time? And he says, look, it's possible to do the right action and not be virtuous, right? But it's also possible to do the right action and be virtuous. What that means, right, is that if you pull the lever to kill that one person, and that one person is, let's say, a loved one, your mom, and you walk away without feeling any sort of remorse or guilt, you're not virtuous, even though you're doing the right thing. However, you can do the right thing and be virtuous. In fact, choosing to kill that one person, whoever they are, should make you feel bad, should make you feel guilty. You need to have the right emotional response to be virtuous. However, just because you are virtuous and feeling that psychological pain, that psychological guilt, is no excuse to not do the right thing. In a sense, again, it's very tough love from John Stuart Mill. You need to suck it up. Be virtuous, feel the guilt, feel bad about it, because that's the right thing to feel. You don't want to be a robot, but you still have to do the right thing. You still have to pull the lever. Here's the last objection. There's just not enough time to do this arithmetic and figure out who's going to promote more happiness in the world. There's not enough time to do those type of calculations in real life. Here's his response. Look, he says, this is not a problem only of utilitarianism. And again, a lot of the people that were criticizing him during the time, right, were Protestants in the United Kingdom. But he sort of takes it back and sort of snaps back at them, right? He says, Christians don't pull out the Bible and pull out the Bible and start reading certain verses before they make certain decisions, before they decide to give to charity or not. They don't start reading scripture, right? Because there wouldn't be enough time for that. So this is not an objection just to utilitarianism. There's an objection to any ethical theory, including Christianity. So that's the first thing he says. But the second thing he says is stop pretending. Stop acting brand new. Stop pretending you don't know. Stop pretending that there hasn't been enough time. You know, you are a smart individual. You're not going to wake up one day and say, I wonder if 5 is greater than or less than 1. That's not going to happen, he says. You have had enough time, your whole life, to figure out that 5 is greater than 1. So act on that knowledge and do the right thing. Okay. that's actually it. That's what we're gonna do for today. It's a lot. Take in the utilitarianism, and in our next recorded lecture, we'll start looking at the wander problem, and we'll start learning a little bit about Immanuel Kant's deontology. With that said, I'll see you folks next time. Bye bye.